All right, today we are going to tackle one of the biggest ideas in international economics, the Heckscher Ohlin theory. It's all about answering a super fundamental question. Why do some countries make certain things while other countries make completely different things?
I mean, really think about it. Why is a country like Germany a total powerhouse for cars, while Bangladesh is a world leader in making clothes? And believe me, it's not random. The Heckscher Ohlin theory gives us a really powerful way to understand this, and it all boils down to a pretty simple idea. You match what a country has with what a product needs. So let's dive in and see how this all works.
Okay, so here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to step into the simplified HO world the model is built on. Then we'll get into its two core concepts, abundance versus intensity. After that, we'll see how those two ideas snap together to create the main theorem, and a pretty surprising consequence. And finally, we'll put your new knowledge to the test.
All right, so first things first. To really get this theory, we have to understand its assumptions. And you got to think of these as, well, the rules of the game that economists set up to kind of strip away all the real-world complexity and focus on one single powerful idea.
So the HO model imagines this simple little world. In it, there are just two nations, and they're making just two different goods. And they're only using two inputs to do it. Labor, people's work, and capital. That's all your machinery and factories. We also just assume that technology is the same everywhere, and that one of the goods always needs more labor, while the other one always needs more capital.
And we're not done simplifying just yet. In this model world, people in both countries like the same stuff, the markets are perfectly competitive, and there are zero barriers to trade, so no shipping costs, no tariffs, nothing. And look, obviously the real world is way messier than this, right? But that's kind of the whole point.
See, by stripping away all those other differences, like who has better tech or what consumers prefer, the model forces us to zoom in on the one thing that's left to explain why countries trade, the different resources that each nation has.
Okay, now we get to the real heart of the theory. It's all built on two key concepts, factor intensity and factor abundance. If you can get these two ideas, you've unlocked the whole model. So, let's start with factor intensity. The easiest way to think about this is like it's the recipe for a product. It's not about the total amount of capital or labor you use, but the ratio between them. For instance, building a jet requires a massive amount of machinery for every single worker. That's super capital intensive. But making a t-shirt, that needs a lot more labor compared to the machinery involved, so it's labor intensive.
Now this graph might look a little complicated, but trust me, the idea is super simple. The axis going up is capital, and the one going across is labor. All you got to do is look at how steep those lines are. See how the line for product Y is way steeper than the line for X? That's just a visual way of saying that to make any amount of Y, you need a much higher ratio of capital to labor. That steep line is proof that Y is our capital-intensive good.
All right, so that's what a product needs. Now let's talk about what a country has. Factor abundance is all about a nation's resource mix. We'd call a country capital abundant if its total amount of capital relative to its total number of workers is higher than another country's. And here's the key thing again, it's all about the ratio, not how big the country or its economy is.
So how do we know if a country is abundant in something? Well, there are two ways to look at it. First, you could just count the physical stuff, the ratio of all the machines to all the workers. But there's a more intuitive way, prices. It's just basic supply and demand, right? When you have a lot of something, it's going to be cheaper. So in a capital-abundant country, capital itself should be relatively cheap. This means its price, we'll call it the rental rate R, is going to be low compared to the price of labor, the wage W. A low R to W price ratio is a dead giveaway for capital abundance.
And this is what that abundance does to a country's economy. This graph shows what a country is capable of producing. Notice how the curve for Nation 2 is stretched way up on the y-axis? That's our capital-intensive good. Why? Because Nation 2 is swimming in capital, so its whole production setup is naturally tilted towards making that capital-heavy good. On the flip side, Nation 1, which is labor-abundant, has its curve biased towards the x-axis. A country is just naturally built to make more of whatever it has plenty of.
All right, we've got our two key puzzle pieces, factor intensity, what a product needs, and factor abundance, what a country has. So now, let's snap them together for the main event, the Heckscher Ohlin theorem itself.
And boom, there it is. The core idea is this. A country will export the stuff that intensively uses the resource that it has in abundance. And honestly, when you break it down, it's just common sense, right? Countries should export what they're best at making. If you have a ton of something, that resource is cheap, and that gives you a natural leg up in making things that need a lot of.
Okay, let's trace this out on the graph because this is where it all comes together. Before they trade, each country is on its own, producing and consuming right here at point A. But once trade opens up, they specialize. Now watch what happens. Labor-abundant nation 1 shifts its production over to point B, making way more of the labor-intensive good X. At the same time, capital-abundant nation 2 moves to point B prime, cranking out tons of the capital-intensive good Y. Then they trade what they have extra of. And here's the magic. Through trade, both countries get to consume at point E, a point that was literally impossible for either of them to reach by themselves. That right there is the power of trade.
But wait, there's more. The theory doesn't just stop with what countries trade. It makes another, even more startling prediction. This time, about what happens to people's incomes inside those countries.
It's called the factor price equalization theorem, which I know sounds super academic, but all it really means is that international trade will cause the price of labor, so wages, and the price of capital to start getting closer to each other across different countries. In other words, trade doesn't just move goods around, it indirectly pushes wages and prices toward a global level.
So you're probably asking, how on earth does that happen? Well, let's walk through the logic. Take our labor-abundant country. Once it starts trading, it creates this huge new international demand for its main export, the labor-intensive good. This, in turn, drives up the demand for its abundant resource, labor, which pushes wages up. Meanwhile, the exact opposite is happening in the capital-abundant country. Demand for its capital-intensive exports goes up, which pushes up the price of capital. As this happens in both countries, the gaps in wages and capital prices between them start to shrink.
Whew, okay, we've gone through a ton of stuff. So let's do a quick check-in to make sure these big ideas have really sunk in.
First question, how do we identify a capital-abundant nation? Think back to those two definitions we talked about.
And the answer, it all comes down to price. Remember, if you've got a lot of something, it's cheap. So in a capital-abundant country, the price of capital, R, is going to be low compared to the price of labor, W. It's that lower price ratio that signals abundance.
All right, last one. What does factor price equalization really mean in plain English? And the correct answer is C. It means that trade makes wages for similar types of jobs move closer together between countries. Just like you see here, those high wages in one country and low wages in another get pulled towards a middle ground, an equilibrium, all because of trade. It doesn't mean everyone earns the exact same, but the gap for similar work definitely shrinks.
So let's end with a final and pretty crucial thought. This theory suggests that trade is great for a country's abundant resource, but it could put pressure on its scarce resource. So, if you think about a wealthy, developed country that's abundant in capital, who really wins from trade according to this theory, and who might lose out? That question, right there, is at the absolute heart of the modern debate over globalization. Thanks for watching.